After years of raising baboons in the wild, John is drawn back to reunite with them, despite warnings of danger. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. But when a fierce new leader threatens everything he holds dear, will he be able to save his beloved Kiki and reconcile the wild instincts of nature with the bonds of love? Write in the comments where you're watching this video from. The sun began its descent over the savannah, casting a golden hue across the horizon as John stood at the edge of his small village, lost in thought. It was a breathtaking sight, one that he had grown accustomed to over the years, but today it felt different. He could almost feel the weight of the past pressing down on him. Memories of his time spent raising a group of baboons flooded his mind, each one more vivid than the last. He could hear the joyful chattering of the baboons and see their playful antics as they swung from tree branches, their small bodies tumbling and rolling in the tall grass. They had been his family, his companions, and the source of countless moments of happiness. Yet, with the joy came an undeniable ache. The villagers had warned him about returning to the wild, about how the baboons had grown more aggressive and unpredictable. "They are wild animals now, John," they said, their voices filled with concern. "You raised them, yes, but they are not pets. They belong to the wild." The warnings echoed in his ears like a persistent drum, reminding him of the risks involved in seeking out those he had loved so dearly. But the pull to see them, to reconnect with Kiki, the first baboon he rescued, was stronger than his fears. As he stood at the edge of the village, John remembered the day he found Kiki, just a tiny bundle of fur, alone and trembling beneath a thorny bush. Her family had been killed by poachers, and he couldn't bear to leave her there. From that moment on, Kiki became his shadow, following him everywhere and growing into a playful, mischievous companion. He nurtured her and watched as she blossomed into a vibrant creature, full of energy and curiosity. The bond they shared was something special, a connection that transcended words and species. He had taught her how to trust again, and she had taught him about the wild's beauty and unpredictability. As twilight settled over the savannah, John felt a familiar tug at his heart. He recalled the laughter and joy that filled his days with Kiki and the others, the games they played, the way they groomed each other, and how Kiki would often leap into his arms, expecting a hug. But the thought of the aggressive new leader of the troop sent a chill down his spine. John had heard the stories from the villagers. They spoke of a large male baboon who had claimed dominance, instilling fear among the other baboons and making them more defensive and unpredictable. The baboons he once knew as his family were now part of a wild world that he could only glimpse from a distance. John took a deep breath, grounding himself in the moment. The stars began to twinkle above, and the air was filled with the sounds of crickets chirping and the occasional rustle of grass. It was time to decide. The longing to see Kiki and the others was an ache that grew stronger with each passing day, pushing him to take that risk. What harm could come from a visit, he whispered to himself, the words hanging in the air like a promise. With determination, he grabbed his backpack, filled with snacks and water, and set off toward the savannah. The path was familiar, though now it felt more daunting. As he walked, memories flooded back, the laughter of the villagers, the warmth of the sun on his back, and the thrill of watching the baboons play in their natural habitat. Each step brought him closer to the place where he had left a piece of his heart, but with it came a swell of anxiety. The villagers' warnings echoed in his mind, but the thought of Kiki waiting for him, possibly longing for him as he longed for her, pushed him forward. As he neared the edge of the savannah, the landscape opened up before him, revealing the vast expanse of grasslands dotted with acacia trees and rocky outcrops. This was where the baboons had made their home, where he had spent countless hours observing them, learning their ways. The sounds of the wild filled the air, the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of birds, and the soft chatter of baboons communicating in their unique language. The memories of his time with them enveloped him like a warm blanket, igniting a sense of nostalgia that was both comforting and bittersweet. John climbed a small hill, his heart racing with anticipation. As he reached the top, he paused to catch his breath, taking in the breathtaking view of the savannah stretched out before him. In the distance, he could see the silhouette of a group of baboons moving through the grass. His heart leaped at the sight. There they were, the creatures he had loved and nurtured. He felt a mixture of joy and trepidation. Would they remember him? Would Kiki still see him as her friend? As he began to make his way down the hill, he spotted Kiki sitting atop a rock, her eyes scanning the surroundings. She looked older, her fur slightly matted and her eyes reflecting a wariness that hadn't been there before. John's heart sank. He realized that she had become part of a world he could no longer control. "Kiki," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. She perked up at the sound of his voice, her ears twitching as she turned her head toward him. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, and John felt a spark of recognition. But just as he took a step closer, a loud bark erupted from the aggressive baboon. The large male, with a powerful stance and an intimidating presence, rushed toward him, blocking Kiki's path. John froze, fear coursing through him. The warnings from the villagers echoed in his mind louder than ever. These are not pets, they are wild animals. Kiki hesitated, looking back and forth between John and the aggressive baboon, clearly torn. John felt his heart break at the sight of her uncertainty. "Kiki, come here," he urged, his voice steady despite the rising panic inside him. But the aggressive baboon continued to growl, asserting its dominance. John could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, as the baboon took a step closer, its eyes locked onto John. Desperation washed over him as he tried to reason with the aggressive baboon. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said softly, keeping his body language non-threatening. He didn't want to provoke the beast, but also didn't want to turn his back. It was a dangerous game, one he never imagined playing. Kiki whined softly, caught in a conflict between her instincts and the love she once felt for John. John took a cautious step back, heart racing. He had come to reconnect with Kiki, to rekindle the bond they once shared, but now he felt the wildness of nature closing in around him. He could see the changes in Kiki. The wild had seeped into her heart, and the connection they once had was now tangled with the instincts of survival and the complexities of her new life. The aggressive baboon advanced, and John's instincts kicked in. He knew he had to protect himself, but more importantly, he needed to protect Kiki. He backed away slowly, trying to keep his eyes on both Kiki and the aggressive baboon. "I'm sorry, Kiki," he whispered, feeling tears sting his eyes. The realization hit him hard. He may have lost her forever to the wild. Kiki stepped forward, her eyes filled with a mix of loyalty and fear. The aggressive baboon let out a warning growl, making it clear that John was not welcome. Panic surged through him as he felt the weight of the situation. He could sense that he was losing the chance to reconnect with Kiki, the very reason he had braved the journey back to the savannah. In that moment, John knew he had to make a choice. He could continue to fight for Kiki, risking everything for a bond that had been altered by nature, or he could retreat, allowing her to remain in her new world, with all its dangers and uncertainties. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he weighed the options in his heart. The love he felt for Kiki was profound, but he also understood that the wild was not something he could tame or control. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. With a heavy heart, John took one last look at Kiki, who was standing with her head tilted, unsure of what to do. He could see the struggle within her. A part of her still longed for the companionship they had shared, but another part was deeply entrenched in the wild, adapting to a life he could no longer be a part of. "Goodbye, my friend," he whispered, choked with emotion. He turned away, his heart breaking as he took slow, deliberate steps back toward the path he had come from. Behind him, the sounds of the baboons filled the air, a reminder of the family he once had and the bond that had been severed by the unforgiving nature of the wild. As he walked away, John felt a profound sense of loss wash over him, the weight of the decisions he had made heavy on his heart. Each step away felt like a goodbye, a painful acknowledgement that he could not reclaim the past. He had raised Kiki and the others with love, but now, in the face of nature's reality, he understood that love alone was not enough to bridge the gap between man and wild. The path back to the village felt longer than before, each step a reminder of what he had left behind. He could feel the tears streaming down his face, a mixture of sorrow and acceptance. The villagers had warned him, but he had hoped against hope that the connection he shared with Kiki would remain intact. Now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the savannah, John realized that some bonds, no matter how strong, could be altered by the passage of time and the instinct of the wild. He would carry the memories of Kiki and the joyous times they had spent together, but he also had to accept that she was now part of a world that was beyond his reach. And so, with a heavy heart and a mind full of memories, John made his way back home, leaving behind a piece of himself in the savannah, with the baboons who had once filled his life with laughter and love. John's heart raced as he walked across the sun-drenched savannah, each step filled with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The vast landscape stretched out before him, golden grasses swaying gently in the warm breeze, dotted with acacia trees casting long shadows. This place, so familiar yet so distant, held countless memories of his time spent with the baboons he had raised. He could almost hear their playful chattering and see their little faces peeking out from behind bushes. They had been more than just animals to him, they were family. As he ventured deeper into the savannah, the memories flooded back, each one a vivid reminder of the bond he had formed with these creatures. He recalled the first time he had found Kiki, a tiny, trembling infant baboon abandoned by her troop. Her big, dark eyes had looked up at him with fear and trust, and in that moment, John knew he had to save her. He had nurtured her, feeding her by hand, and teaching her how to climb and play. They had spent countless afternoons running through the tall grass, exploring the wild, and sharing moments of pure joy. But alongside the warm memories was an undercurrent of anxiety, the warnings from the villagers echoing in his mind like an ominous drum. They had told him countless stories about the dangers of returning to the baboons after so long. They become wild again, they said, shaking their heads. You can't expect them to remember you. They might see you as a threat. John had brushed off their concerns, thinking that the bond he had shared with Kiki and the others would transcend their wild instincts. After all, he had raised them. He had been their caregiver. He believed that love and familiarity would guide them back to each other. With every step, the tension in his stomach grew. What if they didn't recognize him? What if Kiki had forgotten all the games they used to play? His mind raced with questions, each one sharper than the last. He remembered the last time he had seen them, a few years ago, when he had made the difficult decision to let them go back to the wild. He had watched as they scampered off, filled with joy and freedom, but his heart had ached. Now, he couldn't shake the feeling that he might be venturing into a world where he no longer belonged. As he approached a familiar clearing, he slowed his pace, taking in the sights and sounds around him. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, and the gentle breeze seemed to welcome him back, but he felt a twinge of hesitation. Taking a deep breath, he scanned the area for any signs of movement. The clearing had once been their playground, a place where laughter and screeches of joy had echoed under the sun. But now it felt different, eerily quiet, as if the very air held its breath in anticipation. Suddenly, he spotted a flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye. His heart leaped as he turned to see a familiar figure darting between the bushes. It was Kiki. He could hardly believe it. Her fur had grown thicker and more wild, but those big, expressive eyes were unmistakable. Kiki, he called out, his voice filled with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Kiki paused, her head tilting to the side as she recognized the voice. For a moment, time stood still. John held his breath, waiting for her reaction. Would she remember him? Would she run to him as she used to, or would she recoil in fear, a stranger in her eyes? She hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. Then, as if drawn by an invisible thread, she took a tentative step toward him. John knelt down, extending his arms, palms open, hoping to convey warmth and love. It's me, Kiki. It's John, he said, his voice soft and inviting. The connection was palpable as Kiki's eyes widened, her body tensing for a moment before she broke into a joyous screech and bounded toward him. John's heart soared as she leapt into his arms, nuzzling her face into his shoulder just like she had done all those years ago. Tears filled John's eyes as he held her close, feeling the familiar warmth of her little body against him. I missed you so much, he whispered, overwhelmed by emotion. But as the initial joy of reunion washed over him, he couldn't help but notice the slight change in her demeanor. Kiki was more cautious than before, her playful energy tempered by the wildness of her surroundings. John realized that while she might remember him, she was also a creature of the wild now, shaped by experiences he had not been a part of. Suddenly, a rustling sound broke his reverie. John looked up, and his heart sank as he saw a group of baboons approaching from the trees. They moved with confidence and authority, their eyes scanning the clearing, the dynamic between them already shifting. John recognized some of them, but there were others he had never seen before, larger and more assertive, their muscles taut with strength. Kiki stood at his side, her eyes darting between him and the new arrivals. The atmosphere shifted again, tension crackling in the air like electricity. The lead baboon, a formidable male with a thick mane and piercing gaze, stepped forward. His posture was aggressive, and John instinctively felt a surge of fear. This isn't good, he thought, realizing the new baboons posed a challenge to the fragile bond he had hoped to restore. "Hey, it's okay. I come in peace," John said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. He felt Kiki's small body tense beside him, and he could sense her unease. The lead baboon growled softly, asserting his dominance, and the rest of the group fanned out behind him, forming a protective barrier. Kiki's eyes darted back to John, and he could see the confusion etched across her face. She was torn between her loyalty to him and the new dynamics of the group. "Stay close, Kiki," he urged softly, trying to reassure her while keeping his gaze fixed on the lead baboon. The situation was escalating, and he needed to defuse it quickly. The lead baboon advanced, showing his teeth in a menacing snarl. John's heart pounded in his chest. He had always respected these animals, knowing they had instincts and behaviors shaped by their environment. He realized that while he may have raised Kiki, he was now an outsider in their world. "I just want to see Kiki and make sure she's okay," John said, his voice trembling but steady. Kiki hesitated, glancing back at John, her body tense. The lead baboon let out a loud call, and suddenly, the group shifted, positioning themselves around John. He felt a rush of panic as they moved in closer, their eyes glinting with curiosity mixed with hostility. John understood that he was not only facing the fear of losing Kiki but also the raw power of a wild animal who would defend its territory fiercely. John tried to stay calm, remembering everything he had learned about baboon behavior. He needed to show them he was not a threat. "Look, I raised Kiki," he explained, hoping to reach them somehow. "She's my friend. I just want to make sure she's happy." As the tension hung thick in the air, he could see Kiki inching closer to him, her body relaxing slightly. The lead baboon, however, wasn't ready to back down. He let out a warning bark, and suddenly the group surged forward, chattering loudly, making it clear that John's presence was unwelcome. Time seemed to slow as John's mind raced. He had come here seeking connection, love, and the joy of reunion, but now he faced the reality of the wild, their wild. The baboons were not the same playful companions he had known, they had adapted to survival, and in doing so, they had become a family united against a perceived threat. Okay. I'm leaving," John shouted, backing away slowly, his hand still raised. He didn't want to fight, he only wanted to protect Kiki. As he retreated, he could feel the eyes of the baboons on him, watching his every move, assessing whether he would be a threat or simply a lost human who didn't belong. Kiki, sensing John's distress, let out a soft whine, her eyes pleading with him. "I'm sorry, Kiki," he said, sorrow flooding his voice. "I didn't mean to put you in danger. I just wanted to see you." He felt helpless, a wave of grief washing over him as he realized the bond they once shared might not survive the wildness that had taken hold. As John backed away further, he felt a deep sorrow settle in his chest. The baboons were not just animals, they were a family, and he had to accept that he might never fit into that world again. The bond he had cherished so deeply was now shadowed by the harsh realities of nature. Finally, he turned and ran, the sound of baboons chattering echoing behind him. He didn't look back, afraid of what he might see. His heart ached with the weight of what had just happened. Kiki was out there, but she was no longer the baby he had rescued. She was a creature of the wild, and their paths had diverged. As he reached the edge of the clearing, tears streamed down his face, each drop a reminder of the love he had tried to rekindle. He felt as though he had lost Kiki all over again, this time to the wildness that had shaped her. The savannah stretched out before him, vast and unforgiving, and as he walked away, he felt the loneliness settle deep within him. John knew he had made a mistake by thinking he could return and everything would be the same. The wild was unpredictable, and it had changed his beloved Kiki into something he could barely recognize. As he left the clearing behind, he vowed to learn from this experience, understanding that the bonds of love could be both beautiful and heartbreaking. With heavy steps, he made his way back to the village, each stride echoing the pain of separation. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of purple and gold, a bittersweet reminder of the day's events. The weight of his memories pressed down on him, and he realized that love was not enough to bridge the gap between man and nature. As John stepped closer to the baboons, a mixture of excitement and anxiety surged through him. The sounds of the savannah enveloped him, distant bird calls, the rustling of leaves, and the warm breeze brushing against his skin. This was a familiar landscape, a place where he had shared countless joyful moments with Kiki and the other baboons. Memories flooded back to him, the days spent playing games, the laughter that had filled the air, and the bonds that had formed between them. But today, as he approached the group, everything felt different. Kiki, the first baboon he had rescued, stood out in the gathering. She was recognizable by the unique mark on her ear, a small notch that he had given her as a pup to help identify her. As John called her name softly, "Kiki, come here, girl," he watched her eyes widen with recognition. For a moment, it seemed as if time stood still, their eyes locked in a connection that spoke of love and familiarity. Kiki hesitated, unsure of what to do, her body language a mix of joy and caution. As John knelt down, his heart raced with anticipation. He extended his hand, palm open, showing Kiki that he meant no harm. "It's me, Kiki. I'm back," he whispered, feeling the warmth of the sun on his back and the cool earth beneath him. Kiki began to inch forward, her curious nature overcoming her hesitations. John's pulse quickened as she took a few tentative steps, sniffing the air around him, trying to gather the sense of the man she once knew so well. Suddenly, a rustle from the surrounding bushes caught his attention. The atmosphere shifted, and John felt a tension rising among the group. From the thicket emerged a larger, more imposing baboon, his fur bristling and his stance aggressive. This newcomer was unlike any John had seen before, with a commanding presence that sent a chill down his spine. The other baboons fell silent, their excitement fading as they recognized the authority in this baboon's posture. "Who is that?" John thought, his heart sinking as he realized the dynamics of the group had changed in his absence. The new baboon, with fierce eyes and a deep growl emanating from his throat, stepped forward, asserting his dominance over the others. John instinctively tensed up, recognizing the warning signs of aggression. He had read about changes in social structures within animal groups, but witnessing it firsthand filled him with dread. Kiki, who had been moving toward John, suddenly froze. The aggressive baboon's gaze shifted to her, and John could see the fear creeping into her eyes. She looked between John and the new leader, torn between the comfort of her past and the current reality. John called out to her softly, "It's okay, Kiki. Come to me." But Kiki hesitated, her instincts battling between the bond they once shared and the threat posed by this new baboon. The atmosphere thickened, and John felt the air heavy with tension. The other baboons remained close but cautious, aware that the newcomer had changed the rules of their society. John tried to remember everything he had learned about baboon behavior. He needed to stay calm and non-threatening. But inside, his heart raced with anxiety for Kiki and the situation at hand. "Don't let him take you away from me, Kiki." John thought desperately, wishing he could somehow reassure her. He felt a wave of helplessness wash over him as the aggressive baboon took a few steps forward, growling lowly. Kiki's body language shifted, she began to back away, eyes darting between John and the dominant baboon. Please, Kiki, John pleaded, his voice almost breaking. You know me. Remember the games we played? Remember the time you stole that banana from me? He chuckled, trying to lighten the moment, hoping to trigger a memory that would bring her closer. Kiki flicked her ears, the glint of recognition flashing momentarily in her eyes, but the larger baboon wasn't having it. With a quick motion, the aggressive baboon lunged toward John, forcing him to take a step back. The growl that rumbled from deep within the beast was chilling, making John's heart race even faster. He had never seen this kind of behavior from any of the baboons he raised. Panic surged through him, realizing that the bond he once shared with Kiki was now hanging by a thread, overshadowed by the presence of this new threat. Why did I come back? John thought, wrestling with guilt and fear. He had wanted to reconnect, to see the baboons he had loved so much, but now it felt like he had intruded into their world, disrupting a delicate balance. He wanted to protect Kiki, but in doing so, he feared he might provoke the very creatures that could hurt them both. Just then, another baboon from the group, a female named Lila who had always been friendly, stepped forward, cautiously approaching the dominant baboon. John felt a flicker of hope, perhaps Lila could help ease the tension. But as she got closer, the aggressive baboon turned and bared his teeth, causing Lila to back away. It was clear that this newcomer was not only asserting dominance but was also instilling fear in the hearts of the other baboons. In a split second, everything seemed to unravel. Kiki, sensing the change in the dynamics, looked back at the aggressive baboon and then at John. No! John shouted, instinctively reaching out toward her. He could see the conflict in her eyes, and for a moment, he believed she might choose him. But just as quickly, the aggressive baboon charged toward Kiki, who instinctively turned to flee. Stop! John yelled, his voice filled with desperation as he watched Kiki dart away. The aggressive baboon pursued her, and John's heart sank further. He felt an overwhelming urge to intervene, but he knew any sudden movement might escalate the situation. The chase unfolded in a blur as Kiki weaved through the trees, her agile body moving with speed, but the new leader was relentless. Come back, Kiki! John shouted, his heart racing. You can't leave me. I'm here to help you. The panic surged within him as he realized that Kiki, his beloved friend, was now caught between her past with him and the new reality that had taken over her life. He wanted to protect her, but he was terrified of making things worse. The wild instincts of the baboons were taking over, and John felt utterly helpless. As the chase continued, John struggled with the urge to jump in and save Kiki. He watched helplessly as she glanced back at him, confusion and fear etched in her features. The aggressive baboon growled, pressing forward, and John felt a surge of anger toward the intruder. He had raised Kiki, nurtured her, and given her love. How could this newcomer threaten everything they had built together? Stay away from her! John shouted, his voice rising above the commotion. He took a step forward, but the aggressive baboon stopped, turning to face him. There was a moment of tension where time seemed to stand still. John could see the baboon's eyes locked onto him, assessing the threat he posed. The other baboons looked on, uncertain and scared, caught in the chaos of loyalty and fear. In that critical moment, John realized that he had to do something. He couldn't just stand there while Kiki was in danger. Taking a deep breath, he recalled the training he had undergone to understand baboon behavior. He needed to show the aggressive baboon that he meant no harm. He slowly raised his hands, palms out, trying to project calmness. I'm not a threat, he said softly, his voice steady. I just want to help. Kiki, seeing John's gesture, paused for a brief moment. She looked back at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty but also hope. The aggressive baboon, however, seemed unfazed by John's efforts. It let out a deep, resonating growl, asserting its dominance once again. John's heart sank, the situation was spiraling out of control, and he had to act fast. Kiki, he called, desperate for her to understand that he was there for her. You can trust me. Come to me. But as he spoke, he could see the conflict within her. The fierce bond they had shared was under threat, and John felt as though he was watching their connection disintegrate before his very eyes. Then, in an unexpected twist, Kiki took a tentative step toward John, her instincts battling the fear that had taken hold of her. The aggressive baboon, sensing the shift, turned its attention back to her, ready to assert its dominance again. "No!" John shouted, feeling the urgency swell within him. "Don't let him control you, Kiki. You're stronger than this." At that moment, Kiki made a choice. She turned away from the aggressive baboon, her gaze fixed firmly on John. With a leap that brought tears to his eyes, she raced toward him. "Yes. Come on, Kiki," he encouraged, opening his arms wide, ready to catch her as she flew into his embrace. The aggressive baboon lunged forward in a final attempt to reclaim its power, but John stood firm, protective and resolute. Just as Kiki reached him, John scooped her up, cradling her close. He felt the warmth of her body against his chest and could sense her heartbeat, steadying as she nestled into him. "I've got you," he whispered, feeling an overwhelming rush of love and relief. The aggressive baboon screeched in frustration, its dominance challenged, but John didn't waver. He knew he had to stand his ground, not just for Kiki but for the bond they had fought so hard to preserve. The scene was chaotic, the baboons chattering and scrambling around them, but in that moment, John felt a profound sense of clarity. He realized that love and connection could transcend even the wildest instincts. Kiki looked up at him, her eyes wide with trust, and John knew that they would face whatever came next together. Suddenly, the aggressive baboon halted, sizing up John and Kiki. The tension in the air hung thick, but John held his ground, refusing to back down. The standoff felt endless, but with Kiki securely in his arms, John felt a surge of determination. "You may have power over them, but you will never take her from me," he declared, his voice echoing in the silence that followed. As the aggressive baboon's gaze locked onto his, something shifted. Perhaps it was the recognition of John's unwavering stance, or the sight of Kiki nestled safely in his embrace. The baboon slowly backed away, grumbling to itself as it retreated into the trees. The other baboons watched, a mixture of surprise and relief washing over the group as their world settled back into a semblance of normalcy. "Let's go home, Kiki," John whispered, his heart still racing but filled with hope. The bond they shared had triumphed over the chaos, and he knew their journey together was far from over. They had faced the wild instincts of nature and emerged stronger, but he also understood the reality that lay ahead. As John turned to leave the savannah, Kiki nestled closer, and together, they took their first steps back toward the safety of their shared past, knowing they would need to navigate the challenges of the future as partners in this unpredictable world. As John knelt on the ground, the excitement of the reunion began to morph into a creeping sense of dread. The baboons, who once playfully surrounded him, were now drawn into an unsettling dynamic dominated by the larger, aggressive male. This new presence loomed over the group, exuding an aura of authority that sent shivers down John's spine. The playful squeaks and chatter that once filled the air faded into an uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional growl or bark from the dominant baboon. John's heart raced as he assessed the situation. He had always known that nature could be unpredictable, but he never expected the baboons to change so dramatically in his absence. Kiki, his beloved baboon, had approached him eagerly, but now she was hesitating, her playful demeanor replaced with uncertainty. The larger male, with its thick fur and menacing stance, stepped closer, eyeing John with a challenging glare. It was clear that the newcomer was not merely a baboon, he was a force to be reckoned with, a true leader of the wild. "What happened to you all?" John muttered to himself, feeling a lump form in his throat. He remembered the days when he had cared for them as they grew, teaching them how to forage, how to play, and most importantly, how to trust. Each baboon had its own personality, and they thrived on the affection he had shown them. Now, standing among them felt like a betrayal of everything they had built together. He desperately wished he could communicate with them, to explain that he was still the same person who loved and cared for them, but the growing tension in the air made him realize that words might not be enough. The aggressive baboon, who John quickly dubbed Rex in his mind, puffed up his chest and bared his teeth, sending a ripple of fear through the smaller baboons. John felt an instinctive urge to intervene, to assert himself as their protector, but he hesitated. The last thing he wanted was to provoke Rex further. Instead, he took a deep breath and tried to recall the training he had learned about animal behavior, especially regarding the intricate social hierarchies that existed within baboon troops. "Stay calm, John," he whispered to himself, slowly rising to his feet while keeping his eyes on Rex. He tried to project confidence, hoping to defuse the situation. He remembered how important it was to respect the natural order of things, but he also felt an overwhelming need to protect Kiki, who stood nearby, torn between her old affection for John and her loyalty to the troop. "Hey, buddy," John called out, directing his attention to Kiki, hoping to draw her closer. "Come here, girl. Remember all those games we used to play?" He clapped his hands lightly, a signal they had once shared in their days of innocence. Kiki looked at him with a flicker of recognition, but Rex stepped in front of her, blocking her path. The larger baboon growled lowly, asserting his dominance. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. John's heart sank as he realized how powerless he was in this moment. "Please, Kiki, trust me," he pleaded softly, taking a cautious step forward. "I'm still your friend." His voice trembled slightly, filled with a mix of hope and desperation. Kiki hesitated, her eyes darting between John and Rex, clearly conflicted. The once comforting bond they had shared was now overshadowed by the instinctual pressures of the wild. The tension escalated as Rex advanced, his posture aggressive. John could see the fur along Rex's back bristling, and he knew that any wrong move could set off a chain reaction. "I don't want to fight," John murmured, glancing around at the other baboons who seemed to be holding their breath, caught in the crossfire of conflicting loyalties. "I just want to see my friend." With his heart pounding in his chest, John slowly dropped to his knees, trying to appear smaller and less threatening. He could feel the heat of the moment radiating around him, and all he wanted was to reconnect with Kiki, to remind her of the bond they once had. He began to recall some of the gentle ways he had used to calm the baboons in the past, soft sounds, slow movements, and affectionate gestures. "Kiki, remember how we used to eat those delicious fruits together?" he asked, attempting to draw her in. "I brought some for you." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a piece of dried fruit, waving it gently in the air. "Look! Just like the ones we used to find." For a fleeting moment, Kiki's expression softened, and John could see her interest peaked. She took a cautious step forward, her eyes glued to the treat in John's hand. But Rex was not having it. He stepped between John and Kiki, barking aggressively as if to say, "Stay away from her." John's heart raced as he realized he was losing his chance. He couldn't give up now. "Please, Kiki." "It's me," he urged, holding the fruit higher. "You remember our times together, don't you?" Rex snarled, clearly annoyed by John's attempts to reach Kiki. The aggressive baboon bared his teeth, his muscles tense, and John felt the weight of the threat in the air. In that moment, he understood that he was not just fighting for Kiki's attention, he was also challenging the new social order Rex had established. A sudden thought crossed John's mind: perhaps there was a way to appeal to Rex. If he could show respect for the new leader, he might be able to forge a connection rather than escalate the conflict. He took a deep breath, steadying his voice. "Okay, big guy," he said calmly, directing his words toward Rex. "I see you're in charge here. That's cool. You're strong, and I respect that." John took a tentative step back, lowering his arms in the fruit, showing that he meant no harm. Rex's growling paused, his head tilting slightly as he observed John's body language. "I'm not here to take anything away from you," John continued, his heart pounding as he focused on maintaining a non-threatening posture. "I just want to see Kiki happy, and I know she's happy with you guys." As he spoke, John slowly extended his hand, palm open, as a gesture of goodwill. "I just want to share this fruit with my friend. Maybe you would like some too?" Rex stared at him, the tension thick in the air. The baboons around them shifted, caught between curiosity and caution. John's mind raced as he hoped his words would bridge the gap between them. Just then, a soft whimper broke the silence, and John's heart dropped as he turned to see Kiki edging closer, still unsure. Her instincts were pulling her in two different directions, but there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes that gave him hope. "Come on, Kiki," he encouraged gently. "It's okay. I'm right here." With a deep breath, John held the piece of fruit out towards Kiki, feeling the weight of the moment. The other baboons watched intently, their focus shifting from Rex to John, as if they were curious to see how this would unfold. Slowly, Kiki approached, inching closer to the treat, her eyes still darting between Rex and John. Rex remained tense, still keeping a close watch, but something in John's calm demeanor seemed to ease the situation just a little. Kiki reached out cautiously and took the piece of fruit from John's hand, and in that moment, a wave of relief washed over him. It felt like a small victory amidst the chaos. As Kiki savored the fruit, John couldn't help but smile, but his heart still raced. He was acutely aware that Rex could still see this as a challenge. The balance of power had shifted, and John knew he had to tread carefully. "See? We can all share," he said softly, trying to maintain the fragile peace. "There's enough for everyone." Rex took a step back, his posture still defensive but less aggressive. He looked at Kiki enjoying the fruit, and for a moment, the air was charged with uncertainty. John seized the opportunity, feeling emboldened. "You know, I've always believed that sharing makes us stronger. Together, we can be an even bigger family." In that moment, something changed in the air. The other baboons, sensing the shift, began to move closer, intrigued by John's words. It was as if they were weighing their options, contemplating the notion of coexistence rather than conflict. "Let's all have a feast," John proposed, searching through his backpack for more fruit. "I brought plenty. I want to make sure everyone gets to enjoy it." As he pulled out more pieces, he held them up, hoping to win over Rex and the rest of the troop. Rex hesitated, his aggressive demeanor softening slightly as he regarded John with newfound curiosity. The standoff began to feel less like a battle and more like an uncertain truce. John's heart raced with hope, praying that this moment could change the course of their interaction. With his hands full of fruit, John took a deep breath and slowly sat back down on the ground, placing the offerings before him. "Here we go," he said with a smile, inviting them all to join him. "Let's make this a celebration." As the baboons hesitated, John could feel the weight of their curiosity, and Kiki looked at him with trust in her eyes. He watched as Rex stepped forward, his posture relaxing just a little. With a cautious but curious movement, Rex approached the food, taking a piece for himself. The other baboons followed suit, and soon, the atmosphere began to shift from one of tension to camaraderie. John's heart soared as he watched the baboons enjoy the feast, Kiki happily sharing a piece of fruit with Rex, a sign of acceptance. It was a fragile piece, but it was a start. In that moment, John realized that the bond he shared with Kiki had not been lost. They had simply entered a new phase of their relationship, one where he needed to respect the natural order of the wild while still holding onto the connection they had built together. With each baboon that came forward to share in the food, John felt a sense of hope grow within him. He knew that the path ahead would not be easy, but perhaps, just perhaps, they could find a way to coexist in this beautiful, unpredictable world of nature. The tension in the air thickened as John realized that the reunion he had longed for was spiraling into chaos. Kiki, the baboon he had raised and loved like family, looked torn. She was caught between the warm memories of their bond and the fierce loyalty she now felt toward the aggressive baboon, a leader she did not choose, but one that represented survival in her current wild reality. The aggressive baboon had established dominance with a growl that rumbled through the savannah, a sound that sent shivers down John's spine. "Come on, Kiki. It's me," he called out, trying to project calmness despite the rising fear in his heart. He crouched low, extending his hands, hoping to draw her closer. "You remember all those times we played? You can trust me." But Kiki hesitated, glancing back at the dominant baboon who watched her with wary eyes. It was as if she were caught in a tug-of-war, her instincts battling against the bond they once shared. The sight of Kiki's conflicted expression filled John with dread. He could almost hear the unspoken words between them, and the thought of losing her to this new wild world was unbearable. As John stepped forward, he attempted to employ the techniques he had used to train Kiki as a baby. He remembered the patience and kindness that had been the foundation of their bond. "Kiki, it's okay. You're safe with me," he repeated softly, trying to soothe her. But with every step he took, the aggressive baboon stepped closer, positioning itself as the protector of the group, its body language unmistakably aggressive. Suddenly, the dominant baboon lunged toward John, teeth bared in a fierce snarl. Panic surged through him as he instinctively stepped back, heart racing. "Hey! Back off," he shouted, his voice rising above the cacophony of baboon calls. The other baboons froze, their curiosity piqued, eyes darting between John and their aggressive leader. Kiki stood frozen, uncertainty flashing in her eyes. John felt a pang of desperation. He had come to reunite with her, to bring back the joy of their companionship, but now he was a threat in the eyes of the very family he had once cared for. He desperately searched for a way to bridge the gap, to remind Kiki of their time together. "Do you remember the games we played?" John continued, his voice breaking through the tension. "We would chase each other around the trees. You were so fast, Kiki. You always won." He could see the flicker of recognition in her eyes, a tiny spark of the bond they once shared. "And when you climbed that big acacia tree? I was so proud of you." The aggressive baboon moved closer, clearly agitated by John's words. It swelled with power, puffing out its chest and glaring at John. The air was charged with primal energy, and John knew he had to act quickly. "Please, Kiki," he urged, desperation creeping into his voice. "You don't have to listen to him. You are so much more than just a member of this troop." The words were more for him than for her, a plea to keep his own hope alive. Just then, the aggressive baboon charged at John, swinging its arms in a show of dominance. "No!" John shouted, adrenaline kicking in as he instinctively turned to run. His heart pounded in his chest as he darted away, scanning the area for a place to hide. The baboon's screech echoed behind him, a chilling reminder of the danger he was in. As John sprinted away, he glanced back to see Kiki torn between her loyalty to him and the new leader. In that split second, he felt the weight of their shared history. The laughter, the playfulness, the countless evenings spent watching the sunset together, all of it felt like a distant dream now, overshadowed by the reality of the wild. He darted toward a nearby tree, scrambling up its trunk with all his might. "I'm sorry, Kiki. I never wanted this," he cried, climbing higher, desperately seeking refuge. The branches creaked under his weight as he pulled himself into the safety of the tree's canopy, his heart racing. From his perch, he could see the chaos unfolding below. The aggressive baboon paced back and forth, barking orders to the rest of the troop. Kiki stood at a distance, her eyes wide and confused, trying to understand what was happening. The realization that she might not recognize him as her friend anymore hit John like a punch to the gut. "Please, Kiki, remember me," he shouted from above, his voice cracking. "You are my family. You don't have to follow him." In that moment of despair, John felt a flicker of hope as Kiki glanced up at him. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, it was as if time stood still. She took a tentative step forward, then another, her instincts battling with the urge to return to her old friend. But the aggressive baboon noticed the shift and charged toward her, cutting off her path. The heart-wrenching growl sent a chill down John's spine. "No! Kiki, run," he yelled, but it was too late. The aggressive baboon lunged at her, asserting its dominance, and John's heart sank as he watched the scene unfold. Kiki tried to evade the aggressive baboon, darting back toward John, her instincts kicking in as she sought safety. The other baboons watched the confrontation, unsure of how to react, caught in a struggle between loyalty to the new leader and the bond they once had with John. In a frantic rush, John shouted, "Come on, Kiki. You can do this." His words flowed with all the love and support he could muster. Kiki's eyes flickered between the aggressive baboon and John, confusion clouding her thoughts. With a final burst of energy, she darted toward the tree where John was perched. The aggressive baboon screeched, infuriated by her disobedience. "Kiki, jump!" John encouraged, stretching out his arms as if they could bridge the distance between them. Kiki leaped, and for a moment, time slowed. John's heart soared as he saw her form fly through the air, trusting him to catch her. But as she landed on a lower branch, the aggressive baboon lunged once more, angered and territorial. John's heart sank as he realized Kiki had landed just out of reach. "No, no, no," he whispered, panic gripping him. The aggressive baboon was now focused solely on Kiki, and John could see the primal instinct kicking in as it prepared to charge. In that moment of crisis, John summoned every ounce of strength within him. "Get away from her," he shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. He knew he had to protect Kiki, no matter the cost. With a deep breath, he scrambled down the tree, landing with a thud on the ground. The aggressive baboon turned to him, furious. "I won't let you hurt her," John declared, stepping between Kiki and the aggressive leader. Kiki watched, her eyes wide with concern, torn between the two worlds. John felt the weight of her loyalty pressing down on him, and in that moment, he knew he had to fight for their bond. As the aggressive baboon advanced, John remembered the bond he shared with Kiki, the way they had grown together. He couldn't let fear dictate their fate. "You're my family," he shouted, hoping to reach Kiki one last time. In a desperate attempt to assert his place, John made himself appear larger, puffing out his chest and standing tall. The aggressive baboon hesitated, taken aback by John's sudden confidence. For a brief moment, there was silence, a stillness that hung in the air as both John and Kiki waited to see what would happen next. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. And then, as if in slow motion, Kiki took a step forward, bridging the gap between them. The connection between them was undeniable, a bond that had weathered storms and transcended the chaos of the wild. "Come to me, Kiki," John urged, his heart racing. With a final glance at the aggressive baboon, Kiki made her choice. She dashed toward John, leaping into his arms just as the aggressive leader lunged. In that instant, John felt a surge of triumph and relief wash over him. Together, they faced the aggressive baboon, united in their bond. John held Kiki tightly, knowing that no matter the danger, they would face it together. As the aggressive baboon reeled back, startled by their unity, John realized that their connection was stronger than any threat. In that moment, he knew that love could conquer fear, and he had to hold on to that belief if they were to survive this wild world. The confrontation had shifted. The aggressive baboon, sensing the strength of their bond, hesitated, its aggression faltering. John took a step forward, still holding Kiki protectively. "We don't want any trouble," he said firmly, hoping to de-escalate the situation. Kiki looked up at him, her eyes filled with trust, and in that moment, they both knew they were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for the love that had brought them together in the first place. With adrenaline pumping through his veins, John sprinted away from the chaotic scene, his heart racing faster than his feet could carry him. The baboons, once playful companions, had transformed into a whirlwind of wild instincts and dominance. As he glanced over his shoulder, he could see the aggressive baboon charging after him, its loud screeches echoing through the savannah. Panic flooded John's mind. He had always known that the baboons would revert to their wild nature, but he never anticipated how quickly that bond could be shattered. Stay calm, John whispered to himself, trying to steady his breathing as he ran. He felt an overwhelming sense of guilt for putting himself in this situation. He had come to see his old friends, to reconnect with the creatures he had nurtured and loved. Now, he was fleeing for his life, and the thought that Kiki might be caught in the crossfire made his heart ache. John spotted a large acacia tree ahead, its sturdy branches reaching out like welcoming arms. I can't let that aggressive baboon hurt Kiki, he thought, desperation pushing him onward. As he neared the tree, he could hear the chaos unfolding behind him, the baboons shrieking, their primal calls filling the air. He sprinted up to the trunk, using every ounce of strength to leap up and grasp a low-hanging branch. He scrambled up the tree, his heart racing not just from exertion but from fear. Once he reached a higher branch, he paused to catch his breath and looked down, hoping to see Kiki and the others safe. The ground below was a flurry of activity. The aggressive baboon had turned its attention to Kiki, and John's heart sank. She stood frozen, caught in a moment of indecision as the others scattered in fear. "Kiki, please!" John called out, his voice breaking with emotion. "Run to me!" He waved his arms, trying to encourage her to escape the danger that loomed so close. Kiki's beautiful eyes met his, filled with a mix of confusion and fear. She seemed to weigh her options, torn between the loyalty she felt towards John and the instinct to stay with her family. But then, the aggressive baboon charged at her, teeth bared and growls rumbling in its throat. John's heart dropped into his stomach. "No, no, no," he cried, panic washing over him as he saw the distance between them close in. In that moment, everything John had ever felt for Kiki surged within him, a love that transcended the boundaries of species and wildness. He couldn't lose her now. From his perch in the tree, he could see the scene play out in terrifying slow motion. Kiki darted away, her instincts kicking in, but the aggressive baboon was relentless. It lunged toward her, and John felt a surge of helplessness. "Kiki, go," he shouted again, hoping his voice would cut through the chaos and reach her. She hesitated for just a moment, looking back at him as if seeking reassurance. In that heartbeat, John realized how deeply he had underestimated the pull of her wild nature. She was not just a pet but a creature shaped by her environment, and the dynamics among the baboons had shifted dramatically in his absence. The moment stretched on as Kiki made a split-second decision. She took off in the opposite direction, bolting away from the aggressive baboon. Relief flooded John's heart as he watched her run, but the danger wasn't over yet. The aggressive baboon turned its focus back to John, and he could see it was intent on asserting its dominance over the entire group, including him. "Stay back!" John shouted, scrambling higher into the branches of the tree. He realized that he needed to put distance between himself and the baboons while also trying to protect Kiki. He found a thick branch that offered some stability and climbed higher, hoping the baboons wouldn't follow him up. The aggressive baboon let out a series of furious screeches, rallying the others around it. John watched in horror as it charged back and forth, asserting its authority and intimidating the other baboons into submission. They had once been his playful companions, but now they were at the mercy of this newfound aggression. The joyful chaos he had known was gone, replaced by fear and instinct. Kiki stood off to the side, still panting from her sprint. She watched the aggressive baboon with wide eyes, uncertainty etched across her face. John's heart broke at the sight. She was caught between two worlds. He felt the need to call her again, but he feared drawing attention to her. Then, with a sudden burst of courage, Kiki dashed toward John's tree. "Yes. Come on, Kiki," he urged, his voice filled with hope. If she could make it to him, they could escape this madness together. But just as she seemed to gain momentum, the aggressive baboon noticed her movement and charged in her direction. "No!" John yelled, the word escaping his lips like a desperate prayer. Kiki's body tensed as she realized the danger, and she skidded to a halt, torn between flight and fight. In that moment, she looked at John, and he could see her heart was in turmoil. He felt a profound connection to her. He was not just her caretaker but also her friend, and the bond they had formed could never be broken. "Trust me, Kiki," John shouted, waving his arms frantically to guide her. "Come here. I won't let anything happen to you." He could see her muscles relax slightly, the spark of trust igniting in her eyes as she took a cautious step toward him. But the aggressive baboon was faster, lunging toward her with ferocity. "Kiki, run!" John screamed, and at that moment, Kiki took off again, her instincts kicking in. The chase was on, and John's heart raced with fear for her safety. From the branches above, John felt both hope and dread. Kiki dashed across the savannah, the aggressive baboon hot on her tail. She was agile and quick, weaving through the brush, but John feared that the baboon's size and speed would overpower her. "Come on, Kiki, you can do this," he cheered, willing her to keep going. Kiki turned and headed straight for the tree, her eyes locked on John as she ran. "That's it. Almost there," he encouraged, his voice ringing with urgency. The aggressive baboon bellowed behind her, but Kiki's determination surged. In a final burst of speed, she reached the tree and leapt for the lowest branch, scrambling up towards John. John reached out, his heart pounding with relief as Kiki found her footing beside him. He pulled her close, hugging her tightly, their connection stronger than ever in that moment of danger. The aggressive baboon stopped short at the base of the tree, glaring up at them with a mixture of fury and frustration. "Stay back!" John shouted down, feeling a surge of protectiveness over Kiki. They had faced danger together, and he wasn't about to let anything harm her. The baboon shrieked in anger, pacing around the trunk, but the safety of the tree provided a temporary refuge. Kiki nestled against John, her breathing slowing as she realized they were safe, at least for now. He could feel the warmth of her body and the rhythm of her heartbeat against his side. "You did so well, Kiki. I'm so proud of you," he whispered, brushing his fingers through her fur. But the aggressive baboon continued to pace below, its frustration growing. John knew they couldn't stay in the tree forever. They needed to find a way to escape the situation without provoking the aggressive baboon further. He thought quickly, assessing their options. "Okay, we need a plan," he murmured to Kiki, who seemed to understand the seriousness of their predicament. "If we can just wait it out for a bit, maybe it will lose interest." Kiki looked up at him, her eyes wide and trusting, and for a moment, John felt a glimmer of hope. They remained perched in the tree, watching as the aggressive baboon finally grew bored of their presence and began to focus on asserting dominance over the other baboons. The group had scattered, but slowly they began to regroup, and John could see the dynamics shifting among them. After what felt like an eternity, the aggressive baboon turned its back, seemingly losing interest in the chase. "Now's our chance," John whispered urgently, sensing that the moment had arrived. "We need to get out of here." He glanced at Kiki, who looked ready to follow his lead. "On three, we jump down, okay," he said, feeling the adrenaline course through him again. 1, 2, 3. They leapt down from the branch together, landing softly on the ground. John quickly assessed the surroundings, spotting a thicket of bushes nearby. "This way," he urged, leading Kiki as they dashed toward the cover of the greenery. As they reached the thicket, John glanced back to see the aggressive baboon turning to face them again, its eyes narrowing as it caught sight of their escape. "Hurry!" John urged Kiki, pushing through the dense branches, feeling the branches scrape against his arms. The sound of rustling leaves behind them confirmed that the chase was far from over. The thicket provided some shelter, and John pressed forward, hoping the baboon would lose sight of them. He could hear Kiki panting beside him, the sound mixing with the rustle of leaves. They had to keep moving, there was no time to stop. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the bushes as the aggressive baboon barreled into the thicket after them. "It's right behind us!" John exclaimed, feeling the surge of panic rise again. Kiki whined softly, and John realized they needed to outsmart the baboon, not just outrun it. "Follow me," he shouted, veering off to the side as they reached a narrow path leading deeper into the forest. The dense trees provided better cover, and John hoped they could lose the aggressive baboon among the thick trunks. Kiki followed closely, her instincts guiding her as they darted through the underbrush. As they ran, John could feel the weight of their bond, an unbreakable connection forged in love and loyalty. He couldn't let anything happen to Kiki. They needed to find safety, somewhere the baboon couldn't reach them. Eventually, they found a small clearing, surrounded by tall grasses and wildflowers. John paused to catch his breath, looking around to make sure they were alone. "I think we lost it," he said, panting heavily. Kiki flopped down beside him, her body shaking from exhaustion but her spirit unbroken. "I'm sorry for bringing you into this, Kiki," John murmured, his heart heavy with guilt. "I never should have come back without being prepared." He could see Kiki looking up at him, her eyes filled with understanding. She had faced danger alongside him, and in that moment, he realized the depth of their bond. As they rested in the clearing, John couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The aggressive baboon had disrupted their once peaceful world, but he knew they would face whatever came next together. They had survived the chaos, and as long as they had each other, there was hope for a brighter future. Together, they would navigate the challenges ahead and find a way to restore the love and trust they had once shared. With Kiki by his side, John felt a renewed sense of purpose. They would overcome this together. From his precarious perch high in the tree, John's heart raced as he watched the scene unfold below. The adrenaline coursed through his veins, a cocktail of fear and helplessness that left him trembling. The savannah was no longer a place of joyful memories. It had transformed into a chaotic arena where instincts clashed violently. Kiki stood at the edge of the fray, her usual playful demeanor replaced by uncertainty. She looked up at John, her eyes wide and filled with confusion. How could something so beautiful turn so cruel? "Come to me, Kiki. Please," John shouted, his voice hoarse with desperation. He felt like a small child calling for a lost pet, hoping against hope that she would heed his plea. But Kiki stood frozen, torn between the familiarity of John, who had cared for her since she was a baby, and the primal force of the dominant baboon now asserting its authority over the group. The aggressive baboon had taken control quickly, its sheer size and ferocity sending shockwaves through the ranks of the other baboons. They were not just animals to John, they were family, companions he had raised and nurtured. Now, that bond felt threatened, and he could do nothing but watch as Kiki struggled to navigate this new and dangerous social order. With each passing second, the tension grew heavier. The aggressive baboon barked sharply, its voice cutting through the air like a knife. Kiki flinched but did not run. Instead, she glanced back at John, a flicker of recognition sparking in her eyes. He was her first love, her protector, but she was now an adult baboon, and the dynamics had shifted in ways John couldn't fully understand. "Go, Kiki. Get out of there," John shouted again, urgency infusing his words. But in that moment, the aggressive baboon spotted Kiki's hesitance and charged towards her, teeth bared in a menacing snarl. The world around John seemed to slow, the heartbeat of the savannah pulsing in sync with the frantic rhythm of his own heart. He could hardly breathe as the reality of the situation hit him like a physical blow. As the aggressive baboon closed the distance, Kiki's instincts kicked in. She turned to run, her slender legs propelling her forward as she darted away from the threat. But the aggressive baboon was faster, driven by an instinct to dominate and protect its status as leader. John felt a surge of fear wash over him. He could not let anything happen to her. "No!" he screamed, a raw, primal sound that echoed across the landscape. He knew he had to act, but he was torn. If he climbed down from the tree to help Kiki, he might also put himself in danger. Yet, he couldn't stand by and watch as she faced the threat alone. The bond they shared was too strong, too precious. Just as Kiki reached the edge of the clearing, the aggressive baboon lunged, its powerful limbs propelling it toward her with frightening speed. In that split second, John's mind raced with memories of their time together. He remembered the first day he found Kiki, a tiny creature trembling and alone, and how he had cared for her, feeding her, teaching her to trust again. All those moments flashed before him, and he realized he had to try. With a burst of determination, John climbed down the tree, heart pounding. He landed on the ground with a soft thud and called out to Kiki one more time. "Kiki, this way. Come to me." His voice carried across the savannah, and for a moment, time stood still. Kiki paused, glancing back at John, uncertainty flashing in her eyes. The aggressive baboon was closing in fast, and John took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage within him. He knew he was risking everything, but the thought of Kiki in danger made his heart ache. He raised his arms wide, trying to make himself appear bigger and more intimidating, hoping to draw the aggressive baboon's attention away from Kiki. "Leave her alone. She's not your enemy," he shouted, his voice echoing through the air. The aggressive baboon halted mid-stride, its aggressive posture wavering for a moment as it processed the sudden intrusion. It turned to John, its eyes narrowing, and John felt a rush of fear as he realized how close he was to the threat. The baboon growled low, a sound that reverberated through the ground and up into John's bones. "Kiki, come on. You have to trust me," John pleaded, keeping his eyes locked on the aggressive baboon. He could see Kiki hesitating, her instincts battling against the deep-rooted bond they shared. "I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you." With a final glance back, Kiki made her choice. She turned and sprinted toward John, her heart pounding in rhythm with his. In that moment of chaos, their bond became palpable, a silent agreement forged in love and trust. John reached out as she approached, and just as she reached him, the aggressive baboon let out an earth-shattering roar, charging toward them with newfound fury. "Kiki, jump!" John shouted, his voice thick with urgency. Kiki leaped into his arms, and together they stumbled back, just as the aggressive baboon lunged forward. Time seemed to freeze as the wild beast soared through the air, but John caught Kiki tightly, shielding her with his body. The aggressive baboon crashed into the ground, just inches away, kicking up dust and leaves in a whirlwind of motion. John's heart raced as he felt Kiki trembling in his grasp. He quickly backed away, trying to put distance between them and the angry baboon, who now stood fuming and snarling, refusing to back down. John felt a surge of protectiveness, a primal urge to defend his friend. "We can't stay here," he urged, glancing back at the baboon, who was clearly not ready to relent. He turned and began to retreat toward a nearby thicket, knowing that the dense underbrush might provide a temporary refuge. "This way, Kiki." They darted into the thicket, branches scratching at their skin as they pushed through the foliage. John's heart raced, both from fear and the adrenaline of the moment. Kiki clung to him tightly, her nails digging into his shirt as they navigated the tangled mess of branches and bushes. Behind them, the aggressive baboon let out another furious cry, its frustration boiling over as it struggled to follow. John could hear the snapping of twigs and rustling of leaves as the baboon pushed its way into the thicket, refusing to let them escape. "Come on, we have to move," John urged, pulling Kiki closer as they scrambled deeper into the underbrush. The world outside felt so far away, the sunlight barely breaking through the dense canopy above. It was a refuge, but also a trap. They had to find a way to outsmart the aggressive baboon. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. As they continued to run, John's mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. He had raised Kiki from a tiny baby, and now, seeing her in danger filled him with an urgency he had never felt before. He knew that the wild instincts of the baboons were powerful, but he also believed in the bond they had built over the years. Suddenly, Kiki stopped, looking up at John with wide eyes. "What is it?" he asked, panting as he caught his breath. Kiki pointed toward a small opening in the thicket, leading into a hidden glade. John hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "That could be our chance." With renewed determination, they dashed through the opening, emerging into the bright sunlight of the glade. The sight before them was breathtaking. A small pond sparkled in the center, surrounded by wildflowers and tall grasses. John felt a moment of peace wash over him, but he knew they couldn't linger. "We need to find a way to protect you," he said, scanning the area for anything that could be useful. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed behind them, and the aggressive baboon burst into the clearing, its eyes blazing with anger. "Kiki, get behind me!" John shouted, stepping in front of her. The baboon let out a furious roar, baring its teeth, and John's heart raced as he felt the ground shake with the creature's powerful movements. This was a moment he had dreaded, but he would do anything to protect his friend. As the baboon advanced, John noticed a large rock nearby. "If I can just grab that," he thought, quickly dashing toward it while keeping an eye on the baboon. He needed to create a distraction or a barrier to protect Kiki. With a burst of adrenaline, he reached the rock and grabbed it, feeling its weight in his hands. As he turned to face the baboon, he raised the rock high, trying to appear larger and more threatening. "Stay back," he yelled, his voice firm despite the fear coursing through him. The aggressive baboon hesitated for a moment, taken aback by John's sudden show of defiance. This was the moment John had hoped for. "Kiki, now," he urged, signaling for her to move. Kiki, sensing the urgency, darted to the side, using the distraction to her advantage. John felt a swell of pride as he watched her navigate the clearing with grace. The bond they shared had not only strengthened her spirit, but had also ignited a fierce determination in him. "Let's go," he shouted, motioning for her to follow him. They rushed toward the edge of the glade, hoping to find a way out before the aggressive baboon regrouped. But just as they reached the trees, the baboon roared again, charging after them with renewed fury. John's heart pounded as he sprinted ahead, pulling Kiki close. They needed to find a safe place, somewhere the baboon couldn't reach them. "Keep moving," he urged, leading her deeper into the forest. The trees loomed tall, their branches casting shadows that danced across the ground. He could hear the aggressive baboon crashing through the underbrush behind them, its primal screams echoing through the woods. As they ran, John remembered the lessons he had learned while raising Kiki and the other baboons. They were a family, but nature was wild and unforgiving. They had to rely on their instincts and their bond if they were going to survive. "Stick together," he called, leading Kiki toward a narrow crevice between two large rocks. "We can hide here." They squeezed into the tight space just as the aggressive baboon burst into the clearing, scanning the area for them. John held his breath, heart pounding in his chest, as the baboon sniffed the air, searching for their scent. Kiki pressed against him, trembling, and John could feel her fear mirrored in his own heart. They had to remain silent and hope the baboon wouldn't find them. The moment stretched into eternity as they waited in the shadows, the sounds of the savannah fading away. Finally, the aggressive baboon lost interest, moving away in search of easier prey. John let out a shaky breath, relief flooding his body as he realized they had escaped, for now. "We made it," he whispered to Kiki, who looked up at him with gratitude shining in her eyes. But John knew their fight wasn't over. The bond they shared had brought them this far, but they needed a plan to ensure Kiki's safety and reclaim their lives. As they sat in the crevice, a sense of resolve washed over him. No matter what it took, he would protect Kiki, and together, they would find a way to navigate this new reality. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the landscape as John made a silent promise. He would not give up on Kiki or the life they had built together. They would face the challenges ahead, side by side, as they always had. As John reached Kiki, he knelt beside her, feeling the weight of despair settle in his chest. The aggressive baboon had retreated, leaving Kiki vulnerable and injured. "I'm so sorry, Kiki," he whispered, his voice trembling as he gently cradled her in his arms. Her eyes, once full of life, now reflected pain and confusion. John's heart ached at the sight of his beloved friend suffering. He remembered all the joyful moments they shared, the laughter and the carefree days. "I should have never come back," he thought, tears streaming down his face. Yet, he knew he couldn't abandon her now. With a fierce determination, he lifted Kiki carefully, cradling her close. "Let's get you home," he promised, his voice resolute despite the chaos around them. He felt a profound connection with Kiki, a bond forged through love and loyalty. As they began their slow journey back, John realized that no matter how wild the world became, the ties of friendship would always guide him. He vowed to protect her, knowing that together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead, hand in paw, as they embraced their shared journey of healing. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell.